Over 150 new documents were released revealing new information about the late disgraced millionaire and sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein, of course, was charged with sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York and was found dead in his New York City jail cell in 2019. Epstein had ties to former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and many other rich and famous people, including Bill Gates. The 2006 grand jury transcript released by a Palm Beach County judge reveals prosecutors knew that Epstein sexually assaulted teenage girls, but still cut a lenient, very lenient plea deal with him. Now, the transcripts show that the grand jury heard testimony that Epstein raped teenage girls as young as 14 at his Palm Beach mansion. The teenage girls testified that they were also paid cash or rented cars if they found him more girls. The more you did, the more money you made, one detective testified.
Yikes. Nonetheless, in 2008, Epstein cut a deal with South Florida federal prosecutors that allowed him to escape more severe federal charges and instead plead guilty to state charges of procuring a person under 18 for prostitution and register as a sex offender. Epstein was only sentenced to 18 months in jail, during which he was allowed to go to his office and outside of the prison 5 days a week as part of a work release program. He served 13 months in the private wing of a minimum security facility and then entered house arrest. Over the next decade, Epstein would meet many more victims before being charged with federal sex trafficking crimes in 2018 in New York. The Palm Beach County clerk said in a statement that releasing the grand jury documents helps, quote, ensure transparency to the people of Palm Beach County and to the international community that has closely followed the Epstein sex trials.
Yes, so not a lot of new information here, but it is something to see that the people that sentenced him, the judicial proceeding that determined, what you just read, a minimum security facility where he had his own private wing. He could basically come and go as he pleased. He could leave the facility for the entire day to go work, and I think he set up some ostensible workplace for himself right before this that he could go to that was pretty cushy, and then he'd go back there, didn't even serve that entire sentence, then entered house arrest. This was a very cushy arrangement for him, despite all of the evidence presented that he had engaged in sex trafficking and sexual assault of underage girls over and over again, variety of victims, that he roped them into finding more women for him, just this vast web of illegal, illicit, disgusting behavior. And the punishment was just not at all, not that I'm always for throwing, harsher criminal penalties for everyone, but this is one guy you'd think, given what he did, would get pretty harsh criminal penalties, and it was extremely lenient, and we're seeing that the judicial process wasn't misled. They were fully aware of the vast evidence of illegal behavior.
It's pretty cushy justice, to be sure. I mean, adding to the fact that he was allowed to arrange his own transportation to and from the jail, something no other work release inmate is allowed to do, essentially chauffeuring himself around town at the expense of law enforcement. What shocks me about these revelations is how prosecutors handled this grand jury. Because as we know, from Hunter Biden to Donald Trump to anyone, prosecutors in a grand jury do not bring in witnesses that weaken their case. That's the luxury of a grand jury for prosecutors. They can make the toughest possible case, exclude witnesses that weaken it. But here is a prosecutor in their own indictment hearing undermining their own witnesses, saying, well, were you really a victim? You made some money. That must have been pretty nice. You knew what you were doing. And minimizing what Epstein is up to. I have never seen a prosecutor in a grand jury go so out of their way to minimize the horrific crime someone committed.
Right. I mean, you're correct to bring up the Hunter case and the Trump case, where prosecutors are, finding, in the Trump case, it ends up being 34 felony counts for this, campaign finance violation or alleged, but it ends up being 34 felony counts. Prosecutors have so many tools at their disposal to take even a relatively more minor matter and make it a very serious criminal matter. They have a lot, going in their favor. Something that supporters of criminal justice reform like myself often worry about, prosecutors having too much authority to stack the deck in their favor. Here, they didn't use those tools at all. and then this guy, not rehabilitated at all, over the next 10 years, continues to engage in even more depraved behavior in the Virgin Islands, in other places, just totally unconstrained, not like I've learned my lesson and I will never do this again, goes right back to the exact same kinds of things, has many of the same people in his circles. Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, I think, apparently did not have contact with Jeffrey Epstein after this behavior became known. But Bill Gates, who I mentioned, did actually have sustained and continued contact. He still had a relationship, Epstein did, with Bank of America. Some messages have come out about that are just absolutely damning and disgusting. We've talked on the show before about the government of the Virgin Islands and how they wanted to accommodate his desire to change the sex offender registry status there, and he just kind of straightforwardly offered sort of campaign boons. I mean, he was a wealthy person able to get what he wanted. Maybe if the charges had been, if he'd been treated like an actual convicted felon, someone convicted of sex crimes, the way people usually are. I mean, I've covered cases of like 17-year-olds who had sex with their 15-year-old girlfriend and get harsher treatment than this. That happens every day in America, the Romeo Juliet statute things, for sexting or for those kinds of stuff. The book gets thrown at you. It was not thrown at him, and thus he was never painted as a real felon, a person to avoid. Yeah, and as we've established from the record now, maintained very cordial relationships with Palm Beach County and Florida and federal law enforcement officials while in jail, to the point that he gets a deal no one has ever received before, at a level of leniency we have never seen before. And I'm not one to believe in conspiracy theories, but this is one that certainly turned out to be true. Yeah. And the question now is why? Now that we have the documentary record, there is no denying that this prosecutor went wildly out of the norm and out of their way to minimize what Jeffrey Epstein did in an attempt to place blame on the victims. Why? This is a conversation that now needs to happen afresh, and that prosecutor needs to explain why they threw out over 100 years of grand jury precedent to, for this specific, very wealthy, very connected man, completely serve as a defense attorney in a hearing meant to indict him. Yeah. I mean, the why, people wonder, is it because he had dirt on powerful and influential people? Is it because he was an intelligence asset? I've heard that speculated about. Is it money talks and you can buy your way to much greater leniency if you're very wealthy and not a outright political target? All the money in the world can't stop Biden and Trump from facing legal inquiries at this point because we live in partisan political times. But if you're not on a political radar and you have a lot of money, you can buy influence. That would be the explanation, or the explanations that he was useful in some way to some intelligence apparatus because he had these powerful people in his network, the royal family of England in his network through Prince Andrew. So it is, and then obviously his secrets dying with him, the manner of his death, very suspicious to a lot of people. I've always thought that prisons are places of, and he was in real prison by that time. Yeah. Prisons are places of such neglect where actually violence and suicide do happen with great regularity, that it is not out of the realm of my imagination that he did in fact kill himself at that point, and they allowed him to do it because that does happen in prison. Of course, the sort of he was silenced narrative, I understand why people turn to that as well, because he certainly knew a great deal about a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, looking at this, I can't really blame them. But you're right. I mean, the sad reality is it doesn't take a conspiracy to realize that places like MCC, where he was housed, are dilapidated wrecks, where suicides happen frequently. He was not the only suicide even that month. But the reality that you've pointed out very well is that the way to write your own justice system is to be connected, to be wealthy, and to stay out of the public eye. Had Donald Trump never run for president, he likely never would have faced any of these charges related to his New York dealings. Yep. Had Joe Biden lost, Hunter Biden likely never would have seen a courtroom. Yep. The best way to keep going on with crime is to just stay right below the radar and work the refs. Yeah, absolutely true. More Rising right after this.